This is the Retro XP Podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second generation with the Odyssey, Atari 2600, and Intellivision, all the way up to Generation 7 with the Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the best retro Ninja games. And this is going to be a relatively short list, unfortunately, as I love me a good Ninja game. But the ones we got, I think, are all great. Like, they're, some of the best ones I've played in recent years. And even, games that I played when I was younger as a kid. I'll be talking about games like Ninja Gaiden, Shinobi, Tenchu, so many more. All right, with that, let's get started. Retro XP is now part of the Hair of the Dogcast network. The network has tons of bonus content and episodes on Patreon at patreon.com/hairofthedogcast. So help support us by donating and getting access to bonus episodes and the exclusive Discord community. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Episodes are also live on YouTube, and you can follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. So I recently went and played and beat Shinobi Art of Vengeance, and I got it on the PlayStation 5. And it's a brand new Shinobi game, the most recent side-scrolling action platformer by Lizard Cube, the team that did Streets of Rage 4 recently, if you're still kind of in the new game space. This game really, really tested me on my abilities to keep at it, especially during the harder sections and challenges, bringing me back to the days when I was a little bit more of a patient gamer and stubborn in a way. Lately, it's like so many games come out, especially since I'm trying to balance going back to play a lot of my old retro games to even just playing a lot of the new games that come out. And sometimes my patience wears thin to the point where it's like, you know what, I'm not having fun. This game is kind of almost like too hard to the point where I'm like, I'm just going to go play something else. I'm going to go play something else that I enjoy. And this game, while it had such a good balance of being enjoyable and challenging and hard at the same time, to the point that I really stuck with it. And I can't say that about a lot of games that came out recently. I can't sing this game's praises enough. And while I was more of a Ninja Gaiden kid growing up, I still had huge fondness for the Shinobi series. And even this year, like, we got 2 new side-scrolling Ninja games with Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, which you heard me talk about earlier this year, and Shinobi Art of Vengeance. We were eating good this year. We really were. And, we also got a 3D action game with Ninja Gaiden 4 that came out this year too, which is also a great game, albeit completely different in terms of gameplay compared to Ragebound and Art of Vengeance. Ninja games, would you say they're back? I'm not exactly for sure. I think Ninja games were a product of their time back, especially with the game that we'll be talking about today. But, nonetheless, my mind wandered back to remembering a lot of the older Ninja or even Ninja adjacent games that came out in the past. And I want to talk about some of the best retro Ninja games. And first, we got to start out with the Ninja Gaiden games. And if you want a big, deep dive into this series, I recommend you go back into my catalog and check out one of my earlier episodes on the Ninja Gaiden series. It's actually split into 2 episodes. The one episode, I talk about the Nintendo series of games, Ninja Gaiden 1, 2, and 3. And I think I talk about Ninja Gaiden Shadow in that too, the Game Boy game. And in the other episode, I talk about the Xbox series of games. Also Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, and then some of the Generation 7 titles like Ninja Gaiden 3, and then also I talk about Yaiba Ninja Gaiden if that qualifies as a Ninja Gaiden game, but it's there. If you remember, if you've ever played these games, the Ninja Gaiden series really tested your patience, tested your skills, tested your stubbornness in a variety of ways. Ninja Gaiden 1, 2, and 3 had some of the most brutal difficulty in that time. And this was in an era where games that prioritized challenging gameplay with no way of changing the difficulty settings at all to appease those that didn't like the challenge. This was the time when we rented our games. So a lot of people would rent the games for a weekend, beat it, and then turn it back and not want to buy the game ever again. And I think developers at the time were kind of catching on to this to say, like, hey, let's make the game ridiculously hard to encourage people to buy the game, to encourage people to want to complete it fully, because at the time you didn't feel satisfied if you didn't beat the game, if you didn't see the credits roll. So you had to, it's almost like you felt compelled at the time to buy the game, because it's like, well, I can't beat it in a weekend, and you don't want to rent it 5 or 6 times. Because I remember at the time, when my mom would take me to Blockbuster all the time, I'd sometimes rent the same game over and over again. And it got to the point where she's like, I'm just going to buy you this game because you keep renting it. So, that was that was how it was at the time. Hideo Yoshizawa, Masato Kato, and their team at Tecmo just gave us some of the best platforming at the time, and the most iconic music by Kenji Yamagishi, top tier stuff. Some of the catchiest and frantic tunes that just really set the tone of the games and really kind of added to that intensity when you're like platforming through a lot of the levels. I mean, it's crazy because some of those iconic tracks are even covered by Sergio De Prado on Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, and it kind of made me like nostalgic when I was playing this game this year, hearing some of those same tunes. And even Sergio actually had help from the original composers, even something I just learned actually in researching this episode. That's really cool. The game series on the NES revolved around Ryu Hayabusa, one of the heads of the Dragon Ninja Clan, as he treks around the world to stop evil calamities and demons that threaten the fate of the world. He's armed with his trusty dragon sword spawned from the tooth of a dragon. He utilizes agility, strength, and ninja magic, or in this case, ninpo, powers to dispatch his foes and monster bosses. I mean, I will say that going back to the games in this day may be a challenge for you, especially if you've never played the originals when they came out at the time. There's quite a bit of jank to the games that you have to learn, but once you get it, it becomes second nature to you. And jank necessarily mean, when I say the word jank, and I think I've defined it before, where it's like, it's gameplay mechanics and, the platforming, and even like some of the, if you play the Ninja Gaiden games, it has this like kind of like kickback or fallback that can really, really screw up your gameplay loop to the point, like if you hit an enemy, you bounce back quite a bit. And instead of just like taking a hit and then just like still kind of like charging through, and there are some enemy placements that are just downright brutal, just downright messed up. So, Ninja Gaiden 2 at the time was my favorite within the trilogy, and I still have muscle memory intact when I go back to play it. It's got the best music and best level design out of the whole trilogy, and that's my opinion. I know I still have a soft spot for the first Ninja Gaiden because it was my first one. Ninja Gaiden 3 can go jump off a bridge because I just didn't like that one. It was almost like too hard for its own good. Interestingly enough, actually, I just read this yesterday. Ninja Gaiden 2 came out on the Nintendo Switch Online service. So if you're listening to this and you have a Switch, you could download this right now or stream it. I don't know how Nintendo does it with the Switch Online service. Anyway, next up is a little-known game series by Capcom called Strider. This game was originally an arcade release, and then it came out. It was ported to the Sega Genesis, and then they also had titles on the NES, and eventually got a sequel on the original PlayStation. The game's premise revolves around the near future world of 2048, where a Grandmaster controls the world from the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. This game was obviously made in the 80s, so you had those, Soviet-era villains that was so ripe at the time. A ninja group called the Striders are sent to dispatch the Grandmaster's plans for furthering his world domination. Hiryu is the main protagonist, and his weapon of choice is this tonfa-like sword. And if you don't know what a tonfa is, it's going to be hard for me to describe it in words, but it's like you're holding a handle, and it's like you got one part of the stick that goes down your forearm, and the other part like sticks out and protrudes out forward. And normally it's like just a wood, weapon, but this one is a sword. It's really cool. Very unique sword design. I love it. It's got good reach as well. It's got this iconic swing animation that's just so cool. It's a lot longer in the Sega Genesis and arcade port, and the Nintendo one, it's kind of short. The Genesis version is based off the arcade version, which features epic level design, great amount of enemy types that range from human enemies to mechanical robots and machines. I mean, that first level is so iconic with a lot of those Soviet era backdrops and music, and then even when you're fighting the main villain in the first or the final boss in the first level, you got this like crowd of people watching you, and you're like jumping on this mechanical snake thing. It's really cool. The NES version was much different and very unique compared to the linear level design of the arcade and Genesis ports. And I gotta say, this one takes the cake in the weirdest and ugliest cover in the NES era. I mean, it's unique, definitely eye catching, but man, does it not age well. It just looks weird. But that was the era. The game centers around Hiru, who's dispatched around the world by the Striders, led by Vice Director Matic. The game isn't linear like the original title. It's more like an open zone type game. You start the game in your operations base, and as you progress through the game, you start at Kazakh or Kazakhstan, whatever, and then you move on to other areas and operations like Egypt, China, the Amazon, Africa, many others. So as you progress through the levels, you get keys and special abilities that can unlock areas of the levels that you go to. So the game requires a little bit of backtracking, so you may have to go back to certain levels. It's like, oh, you get this key that unlocks this door back in this area, or you get this ability that now allows you to like access this certain part of the level. So it's, this game I think requires a guide, especially for, if you keep going back and forth in it. Like, I mean, if you sit down and do like one straight playthrough, then sure, fine. But if you go back and forth with this, after over a couple of days, I say a guide is necessary. Nonetheless, this was actually one of my favorite games in the NES era. The futuristic setting was really cool. The hero weapon designs were awesome. Even it had a mature storyline for my young brain at the time. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was so cool. High stakes kind of stuff. The PlayStation version, Strider 2, was a return to its linear and arcade style form, and actually this one actually came out for the arcades first before coming to the PlayStation in 2000. The game was pretty unique at the time. It stuck with its 2D design. However, it was like 2D sprite graphics on a 3D scrolling backgrounds. It was pretty unique. But it sometimes messed with your eyes a little bit. It's like, what am I looking at? In the original games, you could do so many maneuvers like slide, climb, and jump, but in this game, it gave you a lot more abilities on top of these. Like, you could double jump, you can dash, and you got so many different special powered attacks with your Tonfa sword, which actually it's called Cypher. Yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. Your sword is called Cypher. It's kind of neat. It's like a plasma sword or something like that. So plasma powered sword. Keep in mind this is the future. And this game actually is a direct sequel to the original arcade title. Grandmaster's back, and of course this game takes place 2,000 years after the original game. I don't know if that's actually true or not. I gotta imagine maybe that was a typo when I read the notes of this game. But I would think maybe 200 maybe is more accurate, because like we're talking 2048 and then 4048. That's way too far in the future. Of course, in this case, the Strider group are still around, and they cloned the original Hiryu to go after the Grandmaster because, why not the OG? The game is very similar to the original in style, combat, level design, all that stuff. You're going around the world again, hitting city levels, snow levels, so many other more different ones. And also, too, there was a Strider game that came out on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but, of course, I'll talk about that in 10 years when that game is considered retro. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. It's an interesting kid-friendly ninja game that came out for the Sega Master System in 1990. In this, Hanzo the Dark Ninja has been awoken after being asleep for 10,000 years and kidnaps your girlfriend for a ritual sacrifice. Of course, Alex finds out he can't do this alone, so the ancient warrior who originally defeated Hanzo 10,000 years ago wakes up and lends his power to Alex. It's a pretty simple side-scrolling platformer, kind of in the vein of like, Mario Brothers, stuff like that, with Alex collecting power-ups, shurikens, sword powers. This game really wasn't overtly challenging. It was actually pretty easy, but there were incentives to completing levels without taking any hits, which was pretty unique at the time. That's something that we see nowadays with like trophies, like, hey, trophies and achievements. But at the time, it was pretty cool. You would get bonus abilities if you could finish each stage on a no-hit run. It was pretty cool. And I didn't have a Master System growing up. I played this game much later on. While the game itself isn't like this like grim dark fantasy, evil setting like the Ninja Gaiden series, it still was a fun platformer that was much less challenging compared to the original Ninja Gaiden games. So, keeping up with the theme of ninja being in the title, Ninja Warriors for the SNES was a very unique game with cybernetic ninjas as opposed to human ninjas. This came out in the arcades first before coming to the SNES in 1994 and was your typical single-plane, side-scrolling beat-em-up. In this setting, the world is overrun by a dominant force with immense military might, mind-controlled powers, basically commanding a human army by mind control. This rebel group that you're part of dispatches 3 android robots designed like the ninja from the old Japanese legends. Keep in mind, I didn't write down like what year this was taking place in, but this is the pretty far future. Each android had a name. The big one was the big bruiser one was called Ninja. He was the most powerful, but he was the slowest. Kamatiachi was the quickest. He also had these like blades on his forearms that were pretty cool, but he was also the weakest. And Kunoichi, who was a female android by design and also was the most well-rounded. She was obviously the favorite pick in that regard, a little blend of both. Very acrobatic. The nice thing about this game, despite its pretty challenging gameplay, is you have unlimited continues. In the arcade, it's different. You got to keep pumping quarters, of course, but on the SNES, you could beat this game just out of pure attrition alone. Like how long can you last? With each continue, you can select a different character as well, so you can try each one to see try each one in each single gameplay session to see which fits your playstyle best. This game didn't feature fast platforming by any means. It was pretty slow. You spend most of your time walking and wading your way through, big enemy groups. But the combat still was fun, I thought, with the combat itself being the main focus. And it tests your abilities to the max in every way possible when you get to an area where you just get swarmed. So, one out of left field is a game called Ninja Assault. And it's one of the most unique out there out of all these games, I feel, with the game utilizing, besides one other game I'll talk about much later, the game utilizes a light gun. This is a light gun game as your main controller. And this came out for the arcades in 2000 and was ported to the PlayStation 2 in 2002. And yes, you heard that right. You are playing as a ninja and you are using guns. And it takes place during feudal Japan. The Shogun Kigai has kidnapped Princess Kuto. And the only way you can stop his resurrection ritual is to dispatch 2 gun-toting ninjas. That is right. The game was fun for what it was, honestly. Like it was I had a blast with it for what it was worth on my PlayStation 2. I don't think I've ever seen an arcade in real life, but I had it for the PlayStation 2. I mean, I collected light gun games on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 like a fiend back then. That was kind of one of my favorite game types, I think, at the time. And something we have VR headsets now, but this game was made by the same team that did the Time Crisis series, so it was very fun, very frantic. Unfortunately, though, there's no cover mechanic in Ninja Assault like the Time Crisis games, but still fun. I mean, you could play with a controller, but that's not fun. Many of you may not have heard about this one, but damn, is this game fun. This game is really fun. When I built a MAME, MAME arcade cabinet a while back with an old PC that I had, and I kind of built the guts of it, used the cheap LCD TV as my screen, whatever. I discovered a game within the MAME catalog that I had called Ninja Baseball Batman. And you probably haven't heard of it here in America because the game was developed here in the US, which is interesting when I was doing my research. But only 50 cabinets of this game were sold total in its life. It did much better in Japan, however. It was kind of like a interesting mix of like Japanese and American sensibilities, culturally and artistically and everything, which is kind of strange because, like I said, the game was developed here by American developers, but I think it had a lot of crossover with Japanese developers. And to me, it's crazy to think about because this game plays so well. very much in the vein of other side scrollers at the time, like the Ninja Turtle games, Final Fight, the Marvel side scrolling games, and X-Men games, and so many others. The story is pretty wild too. The commissioner of baseball needs to dispatch 4 robot fighters named Captain Jose, Twin Bats Reno, Beanball Roger, and Stick Straw to save artifacts that were stolen out of the Baseball Hall of Fame. As you can imagine, hearing these names, especially if you grew up in the 90s, some of these names may be familiar. The robots are designed like real baseball players, like Jose Canseco, Darryl Strawberry. I think Roger, was another, Roger Clemens. Yeah, that was another name. That was kind of like a direct call to him. And obviously, I forget what Reno was named after. But the gameplay was real fun. The enemy designs are really top-notch with heavy baseball themes. And I'm not a baseball fan by any means. Far from it, I would say. But whether you like baseball or not, it really doesn't matter because the gameplay was fun and each character was real unique in their combat abilities. The level designs were great too, and it's so sad that the only way to play this game is to either have the arcade cabinet, if you own the one of 50 that were sold, or just have it MAME emulator on your PC. I highly encourage you to play this game somehow. Do it. Am I even halfway through yet? Yeah, maybe I am. We still got a way to go. There's so many good games, and I know I'm like looking at this list, and I'm like, I still haven't. There's still a lot of games I just haven't put on this list, but maybe there'll be a part 2 at some point. The Shinobi games for the Sega Genesis were top notch, with each game being different from the other. Revenge of Shinobi was the first one. Interesting way to start the series on the Sega Genesis. Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi, and Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja Master were the 3 mainline games in this console generation. There were others that came out before, especially in the arcades, like the original Shinobi and Shadow Dancer, which was an arcade game as well. The original Shinobi was unique to me in that your main character, Joe Musashi, didn't wear a mask at all, and he looked like just like an average white dude. But obviously, you got to appeal to American audiences at the time in the 80s, and ninja movies and ninja-themed cartoons and anime and stuff was pretty popular at this time. Thankfully, in future titles, that wasn't the case. Joe Musashi and any other ninja were masked, like how we interpret ninjas to be. The series itself revolves around present-day era settings, maybe near future type stuff, with the Zed Corporation having been succumbed to demon curses and wreaking havoc on the world, most notably the Iburo clan, wreaking havoc on them, a secret ninja clan whose sole purpose is to protect the world from evil. That's how they're trained. That's how they live their life, basically, as guardians of this fragile world we in. And it's interesting that, with evil corporations and evil demons trying to take over the world, who best to send than a clan of ninjas? One ninja to save the world. So epic. In Revenge of Shinobi, though, the first game in the series, the Zed Corporation was bested by Joe in the first arcade game, has now reincorporated themselves as Neo Zed. How convenient. They kidnap Joe's bride, Naoko, and he then begins his quest to rid the world again of this evil corporation. It is not the first time, nor will it be the last. The game was fun. Interestingly enough, you use your shurikens as your primary weapon. They're basically throwing stars or throwing knives. And your sword, which was more powerful in this case, but you were able. The only way you can use the sword is in close quarters combat, and it does it automatically. Throughout the gameplay, though, you have to save hostages tied up within the levels, and it's the same in Shadow Dancer in that regard. Shadow Dancer, I thought, was a little bit more fun than the first title. I thought it was a little bit more fast-paced, I guess. Not to say, Revenge of Shinobi was bad, but I thought, Shadow Dancer was a little bit better. And it kind of follows the trend of, like, with each successive game, it just gets better and better. And now in Shadow Dancer, the main villain is this group being called the Union Lizard Cult. And they've taken over New York. So you're fighting through the war-torn streets of New York with your trusty dog companion, Yamato, the best doggo. He could be used as a special ability and a special attack, and he basically just like incapacitates the enemy while you go in and just finish the job. However, you have to be careful how you use him. You can't just attack any enemy. If he attacks a more powerful enemy, especially the shielded enemies, he just shrinks down into a puppy, and you can't use him for a time until you get some good attacks in. Interesting fact, actually, I found out with this one, and I didn't know this until researching this, is that the Japanese version, the main character's name is Hayate, who is the son of Joe Musashi. The American version, it's Joe himself. And I'm going to guess it's because the name Joe is obviously more Americanized than Hayate. So maybe they thought American audiences would latch on to that better. Similar in fashion, like I said earlier, you have to save hostages as a side objective. And then in between each level, you have these special kind of in between level sections. Like one of the, I think, really cool ones is that where you're falling down a cliff, and there's like ninjas that are like wall running and wall jumping up to try to attack you, and you have to like basically like scroll left, right as you're falling, just like throwing shurikens and like trying to dispatch as many as you could. If you didn't dispatch everyone, it's fine, no big deal. But the game awarded you more points the more enemies you dispatched. It was kind of a fun little distraction, something fun to do in between. However, the best out of the three is Shinobi 3, which it's a huge departure from the previous two titles. To me, it was the best out of the trilogy. Joe Musashi is back, and he needs to dispatch the Neo Zeed Corporation once more, because he just didn't learn the first 8 times. The gameplay was much faster than the previous titles, with a new ability to run, sprint. You can actually, my favorite ability is to like jump and do like a diving jump kick, which was really cool, super powerful, and like an easy way to dispatch enemies. And all these new abilities expanded the gameplay to new heights, in some cases quite literally. You're able to go up now, especially with the wall abilities. The game actually was an amazing showcase of the graphical power of the Genesis, coming out kind of later in its life cycle, featuring some great animation work, parallax scrolling, really good stuff. It was also the easiest out of the entire trilogy, which to me isn't saying much, because it's still quite challenging. Like, there's still some sections that just give me grief. Shinobi 3 is one of my favorite ninja games of all time, and one I go back to almost yearly. I know I didn't talk about this, but all 3 of these games were, the music was so top notch, especially in Shinobi 3. Some of the most epic music out of anything the Sega Genesis put out, and of course Yuzo Koshiro, who's to me one of the most iconic video game composers at this time, even to this day, did the music for this game series. And man, does he not disappoint. I know there's like soundtrack compilations of his stuff that he did in the Shinobi series, and just, man, it's good. Holds up to this day. Ninja Shadow of Darkness was an interesting game that I'll mention here too, because it was a unique branded Ninja game, and I think that's why I'm kind of putting it here. It was made by the same developers as the Tomb Raider series, which was interesting. And this game was an isometric view ninja platforming game. Not side-scrolling, not quite like third-person camera behind the back. It was like kind of like isometric in a way. Like the camera was positioned weird. It utilized, actually, the great 3D effects that the PlayStation had. You could use a variety of attacks. You can punch, you can kick, you can use swords, shurikens, ninpo powers. The game really didn't have much of a story worth mentioning. Like, you just, you dropped into the level and you just, whatever, defending your village, so to speak, from this evil calamity, of course, whatever. And it had some great level exploration areas that rewarded you for going off the beaten path sometimes to find new, items, golds, whatever. However, I gotta say, this wasn't the best ninja game to play on the PlayStation. And we all know what it was. Tenchu. Tenchu was the king of ninja games in this generation. And crazily enough, the myth of the ninja, when you think about it, like, was one of stealth and assassination. They weren't the type of, the ninja really weren't the type to like go out into the open and just like start slashing people like crazy. They weren't using, open combat. They weren't using magical powers. And, Tenchu changed all that. Tenchu came into the world in 1998, changed all that, focusing primarily on stealth mechanics and infiltration, like the real ninja. And in this game, you can play as one of 2 characters, Rikimaru or Ayame, in 2 separate campaigns. Each has their own reason for being in this world. They have their own unique abilities, but the focus still centers around stealth and infiltration primarily. Both characters have a grappling hook, which can be used to access rooftops to help you get the drop on your enemies. This is pretty much the main way you maneuver around the levels, is just hitting up rooftops, hiding up against walls, and doing peek arounds. Like, I want to say that was one of the first games, besides Metal Gear Solid at the time, that really utilized the peeking around walls and hiding over walls very well. The game punishes you though for being reckless, as your health isn't the greatest in open combat. You're really not designed. You're not built for open combat. So sneaking up behind them and then just like stabbing and insta killing them is the way to go with this. But like I said, stealth. Sometimes, like when people hear games like, oh, stealth mechanics, it's like, man, it's pretty boring. But it's easier than you think in this, and it's actually a lot more fun than you realize. After this, we got Tenchu 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins, I think 2 years later. It was actually a prequel to the first game, which showed Rikimaru and Ayame's origin stories and how they got their clan affiliations. Once again, the game focuses on stealth almost entirely, and after each level, it ranks you on your abilities, just like the previous game, so nothing really new. But the one big feature, the new feature in Tenchu 2, is a mission editor where you can actually make your own layouts and enemy playsets and mission objectives. You can throw different mission objectives in here. This was so much fun to tool around with back then. I kind of miss mission editors. Like, I know it's easy. It's easy now to make your own games. I mean, it's easy to get into, but it's hard to really master, or at least come up with a final product. But just in-game mission editors. I mean, I can't remember the last time we had anything like that. I know Forge mode. We got Forge mode for Halo. I think Far Cry had some mission editors too as well. But for the PlayStation 2, we got Tenchu Wrath of Heaven, which took a weird turn. It's actually allowed for open combat to be more friendly for people who preferred that style of gameplay. The game still gave you more rewards for stealth, but gave you the option to play either way you want. Shadow of the Ninja for the NES was an easy answer for you if Ninja Gaiden was too hard for you. It tasked you as one of two ninjas, Lord Hayate and Lady Keed, I think, being sent to assassinate the evil dictator Emperor Garuda, who took over the entire United States. The cool thing about this one was that it was actually, you could actually play this 2 players, like simultaneously. I think in these other games I talk about, none of them were 2-player. You can use various melee weapons like a katana, as well as a kurosagama, which is a metal chain with 2 large hooks on each end. I mean, you'll have to Google it if you want to know what that looks like. That's the best way I can describe it using just words. Shurikens are also your long-range weapon attack option as well. The music, honestly, was so good. Like, amongst one of the best soundtracks for the NES, in my opinion. It was just super catchy, energetic, like something you could just really bop your head to. The level design was kind of similar at the time to the Mega Man titles, like very short. You have a stage, but you have like short little subsections that you have to get through. Similar platforming sections, climbing ladders, jumping on ledges, stuff like that. But and boss battles at the end of every stage. Not like, you got to select your own stage like, the Mega Man games, but the game was very doable. I don't want to say easy. It still had its challenges, but it was very beatable. Nothing you'd have to pull your hair out to complete. But interestingly enough, actually, I kind of had this feeling at the time because I felt the games were very similar, but this game was going to be ported to the Game Boy, and it was. However, they changed the name to Ninja Gaiden Shadow and changed the main protagonist to Ryu Hayabusa, the main protagonist of the Ninja Gaiden games. And it still retained the core sound effects, the core music, and level design all remain the same, making it Shadow of the Ninja in its core, but of course just slap Ninja Gaiden name on it, because at the time I think the Ninja Gaiden series was more well known, more had obviously bigger reach, and was more popular than the Shadow of the Ninja game itself. So I think it was probably just just obviously meant to sell better than Shadow of the Ninja for the Game Boy. And I loved Ninja Gaiden Shadow. despite the fact it was far easier than its NES counterparts. I was actually shocked at the time. But I remember playing Ninja Gaiden Shadow for the Game Boy, and I was like, God, the music and the gameplay just like sounds so familiar, and a lot of the different sound effects and like latching on the ledges and stuff. I was like, this kind of reminds me a little bit like Shadow the Ninja. So I think at the time I thought like Ninja Gaiden was trying to copy Shadow the Ninja, but I guess later on, much later on, I found out that this was actually done on purpose. Like the developers that made Shadow the Ninja developed this game and then just, made it a Ninja Gaiden game, I guess, on the surface level. So, I'm not knocking it. It's still a fun game to pick up and play real quick, even though it may not be a core Ninja Gaiden game that you expect. But, yeah, last but not least, and I can't believe it took me this long to talk about this game, Ninja Golf. This game came out for the Atari 7800 and had probably some of the most unique style of golf gameplay to this day, and one I wish we could revisit in the modern era. I wish someone, Atari, you're still around. I want a remake of this game. Like seriously, I think it would be so cool. It'd be very unique. It'd probably be one of the first times I'd ever willingly buy a golf game. So the premise of this game, you finish your ninja training, and your final test to become a true ninja requires you to play 9 holes of golf. But the caveat is you have enemies blocking your paths. A mini map pops up, so you start the game, the mini map pops up, you're a ninja, and you're basically like lining up to hit your shot. So you hit it as long as you can, as far as you can. And when after you hit your ball toward your hole, that's your objective. You have to run to where you hit it. And to me, I wish golf was like this because it would make it a lot more interesting to watch. Like if it was like golf speed running, kind of similar to how what Mario Golf is now, where it's like you have to actually like run to your ball to hit it and complete the game as fast as you can. Of course, as you're running to your ball, enemies swarm you and try to stop you from your goal. Basically the game turns into a side-scrolling beat 'em up from there. You have ninjas trying to stop you, as well as gophers, frogs, birds, so many more. I didn't play this game at the time it was released, but I remember years ago watching gameplay of this at Midwest Gaming Classic. I was walking around the area. If you've ever been to Midwest Gaming Classic, there's like a big like museum area where people bring systems, and they basically, you can sit down and play it if it's open. And every system imaginable you could think of. It's, goes all the way back. So you could sit down and play classics like, a lot of the Atari systems, the Odyssey systems, Apple IIs. I mean, whatever. I don't know who does it, who brings these systems in, but kudos, man. You got some people that have never seen technology like this before, touching your controllers, messing around with your systems, and just, and granted, a lot of it's under lock and key. You can't just like pick it up and just walk out with it, rightfully so. They have it locked up, but it's still really, it's really trusting to have like a bunch of random strangers like playing with your stuff. But yeah, I was like walking around this section years ago, and I saw somebody playing this game, and I'm like, this is a game. So I waited for him to finish, and then I sat down and I played it for a while. I sat down and I was like hooked with this, which is honestly, this is the first Atari game in general that like really kind of got me hooked. I've played, the Atari games before, and, it wasn't necessarily my first system that I ever played. I mean, Atari, I did play. I played Atari games on my friend's system at the time before I even got an NES, but I wasn't really interested in video games at the time because, once the NES came out, I was like, oh, game over. I need to be in this world. I need to be playing video games. So, at the end of every hole, of course, going back to the game, once you get to the green, instead of trying to put your golf ball into the hole, like you would think like, oh, now the putting sequence happens, you have to fight a dragon. And basically the game turns into almost like a third person camera view of like, behind you. And you have to like scroll left and right trying to avoid the dragon shooting fireballs at you. And you're just basically like throwing shurikens at it. And then this is a real game. This is a real game. Came out for the 7800, and I loved it. I loved every bit of it. So there are so many more Ninja games to talk about, and I know I left out an entire series of games. I know you're probably sitting here waiting for me to talk about Ninja Turtles games. However, I feel that deserves its own episode, so stick around. I will for sure be talking about those games. If you listen to my previous episode where I talk about my top 10 video games list, Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist is on there as one of my favorite games of all time. So I'll definitely be talking about those games because those are some of the most iconic Ninja games at the time, even though they were like, you were turtles. But nonetheless, still fun games. There are other games that featured ninjas in them as not necessarily primarily major ninja focus, but they were playable characters. Double Dragon 3 had a ninja in there. He was a villain, and then you converted him to fight along with you, which was it was an interesting gameplay mechanic that the characters that helped aid you basically joined your side in the later parts of the game. Virtua Fighter had a ninja in it. Final Fight had, I think Guy, he was wearing a ninja gi, so he was probably ninja. Onimusha, obviously kind of ninja samurai-esque. You're fighting demons and stuff. And there's so many more. I think Last Ninja or something like that. I think for the SNES, if I'm remembering. I'm just spitballing. I'm talking about off the top of my head right now, but we honestly don't have time for all that. I mean, hell, actually, who knows? I may revisit this topic again in the future too. I mean, best Ninja games part 2. So, but for now, actually, this episode was primarily focused on some of my favorite Ninja titles that I played throughout the years. So games that I had very strong nostalgia for. So, if you have some games that you played retro that were Ninja themed, definitely let me know. Join me and the Discord if you're a Patreon member, and obviously, follow me on the social medias and let me know. That about wraps it up for this episode. Be sure to follow me on my socials on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable those notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. The episodes are also being posted live on YouTube, and follow me there as well at RetroX Podcast. I also want to thank the Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me in their group of shows, and consider contributing to us at Patreon at patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast, and join the community where you can get early access and exclusive episodes every week, and obviously the Discord community where you can talk about any game that you want and a bunch of other common things that we're talking about there. We talk about some interesting things in there. Let me say that. All right. So thanks for listening, guys.